After humanity dealt with the Olympic Empire as it tried to take Earth by force, all other species that heard about this wanted to use humans for their own military gains. However, Earth itself had been severely damaged, and this meant that most of humanity refused to even think about getting in another war, as they needed to rebuild their world, they needed to expand, they needed to reach out into the stars so they could finally protect themselves. And this is when the payment came. When payment of ships capable of FTL arrived as payment, a contingent of human military were sent out to fight. They performed well. What surprised many of them is how these humans would simply charge forward, screaming, not seeming to care about their losses as they drove straight towards the munitions. They always accomplished their missions, but they always bled for it. This is how everyone realized why humanity had been able to fight off an entire empire when humanity only had their cradle world to fight for. Though it was noted that everybody did turn against the Olympic Empire because you never, ever assault a cradle world. You don't want to exterminate a species. You just want them to surrender. These small human contingents would go into the battlefield and destroy. This was evidence as the destruction of any battlefield these humans was on was always extensive, especially as those that reached the planet's surface or the station just didn't seem to stop. They seemed to get struck and just keep going, and they screamed and cried, and they would simply kill. As they were being so effective, all the different species wanted to understand why these shock troopers from humanity did what they did, why they were, and it turned out that these human shock troopers seemed to let their pride, and especially pride in their title, assure total destruction of a target, making sure that nothing remained. This was compounded as whenever you talked to one of the leadership of this human unit, the leaders seemed to be taking a sort of sick pride in the losing of personnel and still accomplishing the mission. When asked simply why think like this, the humans would simply look, grin, and simply state what they are. Though effective, many species were actually hesitant to use them after this, so they requested that the humans send something else. They did. It seemed as though humanity, after just a few of their planetary rotations around their star, was already beginning to regrow and rearm, as the next group of human military came in a much larger group. Their first mission was the routing of the swamp-ass forces on Anal 2. These humans dropped from orbit, literally, and when they opened their pods, these human shock troopers screamed and charged in every single direction, taking out anything that was in front of them. The troopers were covered by all sorts of machines that seemed to fire out in all different directions, allowing them to escape their pods if they did make it to the surface, and charge into anything. Though it was clear at first they were not charging directly at the enemy lines, the aggression of their movements was absolutely clear by any of those that saw them, utilizing any suborbital aircraft or ground-based systems to their advantage. They would rush through any opening already open for them, and the wild abandon of these humans was just as aggressive, just as violent, and even more destructive, with even more in-atmosphere units firing into the enemy lines, taking out any vehicle, any building, any subterranean structure, and of course, any enemy themselves. It is noted that the first group of humans relied heavily on orbital bombardment and close orbital fire support to soften the enemy lines. This group of humans didn't charge recklessly. Well, they did, but not as reckless. And yet they relied heavily on whatever was brought with them, anything at their disposal. The battles this type of human warrior fought always led to victory, yet still had this odd pride in their losses. It confused them all. Why would you take pride in that? As the battles for worlds pushed closer and closer to the enemy homeworlds, it was clear that aggressive smaller forces would not be enough. They did not have the firepower to push through. They did not have the numbers. Though these were effective, The losses were beginning to mount. Seeing this, the coalition of units that came to help them asked the humans for a larger unit, but also asked for one that can drop onto the planet and get past the defenses. This was a huge question to ask. How could you get past defenses? How could you possibly get a large unit on the ground past the defenses? You don't possibly have that many that can drop from the sky. It's going to be a major problem to get them on the ground. The humans just replied, "That's not a problem at all. We're used to it." All the friendly allied species would understand the nonchalance of that human phrase of "no problem" as they saw the next battle. On the industrial planet of Deekchees, even the allies of the humans were surprised to see how many battle-ready warrior humans were sent down, all of them in pods screaming through the atmosphere before anyone even realized the entire sky was covered, seeming to shade out all those on the ground, not realizing what was going on. Many thought it was bombardment, so they simply headed for cover, but if they knew what was coming, they would have manned their guns and tried desperately to take them out. The Allies thought about what they had when they first took humans into their ranks. They thought about the first ones, who were just a few companies of scattered humans, and these may be smaller groups that worked all right on smaller targets. The next ones were battalion size that dropped in and acted almost identical to the first, though it was clear that they had different units as they used different nomenclature, and of course the badges that they wore were different. Now, entire brigades were landing on the planet with the mission of making it as difficult as possible for the opponents to move any of their supplies, any of their logistics around. These humans immediately destroyed bridges, access ports, supplies, spaceports, and of course any enemy they came across. They would seem to group up and keep moving. They made an unholy mess of things on the planet as they tear into the enemy lines themselves. The confusion of all this forced many of the enemy to try and reconsolidate, which began the movement of items out of cover. This exposed them to air, artillery, and drone assets as they finally were revealed. This tactic was massively effective, even if it costs on the drop as they come down. Some are even taken prisoner as they fumble about trying to find their units as they don't have any type of guidance from the top, not until they get air superiority. As the battle continued with all sorts of disarray all over the planet, losses began to mount high as small units of these humans would try to take objectives that were far larger than they should even try, taking out the objective, but they would receive high casualties. All species that saw this wondered why the human warriors all acted like the previous one when they were told that the first one or first two were completely different. These were specialized forces. But now, why do they all act like this? Yet their answers came not from words, but when they noticed the insignia of previous units all over the command structure of this new unit, which meant that because the command came from those self-destructive units, this is how they treated those warriors beneath them. When it finally came time to take in the Titty's second planet, which would force the surrender as one never, ever takes the Cradle World, the alliance of alien forces needed humans that would not destroy indiscriminately. There would be far too much structures that needed to remain, far too many non-combatants down there, so they needed something else. When they told the humans about this, the humans said, "Okay, you got it." Again, a nonchalant answer. They expected more of the same, small units that were extremely destructible. But what they received surprised them as division-size elements of combined warriors and support came around the planet. Upon making planetfall via pods and ships and everything else, the difference in mentality was obvious. The sudden fast, slow march across the planet seemed a bit too cautious for many. Yet the combined vehicles, ground warriors in exosuits, air assets, artillery, drones, orbital fire support all worked in conjunction with each other like this horrific ballet, this orchestra of destruction that tore its way across. Many that feared the screaming humans found these quiet humans even more terrifying. Though they would be very loud once it was the time to be loud, which was when the fighting was in full swing, they usually stayed very quiet. Everybody began to fear the quiet more as they realized that if one or two humans were out there and it was very quiet, the enemy would hear nothing, and then, just before they heard the sound of the projectile, they would feel a slight tinge and then hear and feel nothing ever again. What also surprised everyone about these new humans is the care they had for each other was evident, as they would quickly care for each other, dragging them off the battlefield even for injuries that were non-life-threatening. Not only that, but they would even care for the combatants, in many cases finding wounded ones and taking them back to a medical facility to make sure they survive. A video from the battlefield that the humans were not supposed to be taking, but they did anyway, prove this. As the video showed a wounded titty soldier being taken care of and being picked up and taken back to the human lines to receive care, suddenly the humans received a counter battery that fired on their position. Instead of running for cover, leaving all those wounded to die to the explosions, most of the humans covered the civilians in the area, protecting them with their own bodies. On the very right side of the video, a human in an exosuit covers a female titty with her two children with his own body. This act cost him an arm and a leg. As the video from whichever soldier was getting back up, they could see the human in the exosuit as blood poured out of the missing limbs. Instead of yelling for one of his medics, the human seemed to back up, and when listened closely, you can hear this human warrior ask the titty female if she was all right. Once it gets to the translator, she gives their version of a nod, and then he turns and asks, "Are the kids okay?" And then he fell over, immediately expiring, not caring about himself, but caring about those around them. Seeing this surprised everybody, and the common phrase was, when translated correctly, was, "What the hell type of human is this?" They took special care not to strike any non-combatants, even those that ran through the firing line. They tried not to destroy the livelihoods of the locals so that the locals can survive once the battle's over. They even aided everyone that needed it, and they were still able to face the enemy in close combat, even taking out the enemy warriors with sharp pieces of metal and then simply drawing this metal out, wiping the blood off, and putting it back into its sheath before simply continuing the mission like it was nothing. When the planet was secured, and secured ahead of schedule, there was no celebration from the humans like the other ones did. Just a bunch of humans staying quiet. And when asked, they said, "We're just waiting for our ride." As it turns out, these humans, though they were warriors themselves, just wanted to go home. And with this victory and the war being over, they could finally return. Before leaving, an insectoid Balsuck warrior recorded a conversation with the human warrior that had saved him and he had fought beside through the entire campaign. "Why are you not like those other humans?" he asked. The human was clearly confused and asked for some sort of explanation of what he meant. Of course, after trying to get the words correct, the human finally realized what he was talking about. The human turned, pulled up his visor, showing his own two green eyes, and then looked into the Balsuck's 6 eyes and said, "Those other ones, those are shock troopers. I mean, they go by different names, but that's what they are." "What about you?" "Us?" the human said as he turned his head and looked back and forth at his own comrades who had been listening in on the conversation. We're quiet professionals." "Why are not all humans this way?" The human seemed to relax a little bit as he lowered his visor and said, "Oh, that's a simple explanation. It really depends on what the mission dictates, which type of human warrior you're going to get." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me today on the short story. Before I go, I need to send out some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those will be Prozac and Pancakes, SS Demon, Erica Gem, Brian Kemp, Guardian Sage, and Sir. Thank you all for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntext, punching out.